Welcome back to Cheddar's Opening Bell, everyone. As TikTok is readying a lawsuit against the Trump administration's ban of the Chinese-owned social media app in the U.S., another company is falling victim to the ban as well. Washington has expressed concern over WeChat's collection of data on the activities of overseas Chinese citizens. For more on this, I want to bring in our next guest, Howard Yu. He's a Lego professor of management and innovation at IMD Business School. Howard, it's always good to see you joining us from Hong Kong today, which is great. So what kind of broader impact do these bans have on this tenuous relationship between the U.S. and China?
I mean, banning TikTok is one thing, but going after WeChat becomes a much broader implication. For one thing, WeChat is almost this universal app inside China. So whether you are communicating with friends, paying your tax, or checking in hotel, using the internet and all kind of payment system is all rolled into one. It's almost like Amazon, Twitter, and every single app is inside this integrated functionality. So banning and kicking out WeChat, meaning all the Chinese consumer couldn't really use an iPhone, for example. So it's a lose-lose situation for everyone.
So walk us through exactly what the Trump administration is claiming here when it comes to TikTok and WeChat.
I think majority of the concern is really coming down to data security. It has this belief that because all these apps are essentially connecting to millions of consumers, and they have a lot of information about the consumer in terms of their habit, their geolocation, and it's this belief that any Chinese company would succumb to Beijing pressure and would share this information with the government. Now, what TikTok has been claiming is all the data are in fact stored overseas. Some of these are in Singapore, some of these are in the United States, so there shouldn't be any concern of such. And they are also building data center in Ireland as well. However, from Washington perspective, this is still not enough. And so here is why the crackdown coming in. I think the biggest concern is all these interventions are basically done on executive orders. There is no public debate, there's no independent studies, and there's no mechanics for counter appeal.
That's a really good point, Howard. And you walked through TikTok's claims there, right? Its response to this. It says it's never given any data to the Chinese Communist Party. But is it against Chinese law to refuse any information request from the government if the government was to put a request in with TikTok?
I think this is where the gray area becomes. So in the Chinese law, or at least what people would expect, is company or businesses would comply to any government request. And this is sort of the industry expectation. But at the same time, the TikTok founder basically describe all this data are reside overseas, and we would never do such a thing. So it's hard to project what would get unfold, and this is where the suspicion comes in. But either way, by kicking out WeChat or kicking out TikTok, essentially Washington is saying, American consumer, you have no choice, and you're not allowed to use such an app right away. And so it's almost like government dictating what kind of communication mode an individual consumer should use. And that, I think, would be the angle when TikTok is filing the complaint or filing the lawsuit.
Obviously would impact millions, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of consumer, to your point there, Howard. I do wonder, Microsoft, if it does step in and make its bid for TikTok that we're hearing is reportedly at $30 million, does that add a layer of protection? Should a consumer feel more comfortable if a U.S. company buys the U.S. operations of that?
Well, this is where from the Washington they call Microsoft is the very American company. And so this is why at least the Trump administration would allow the two companies to continue with the negotiation. Now, we are talking about around $50 billion right here for acquisition. So thinking back about Microsoft, they acquired LinkedIn a few years back, it's about $26 billion. So we're talking about the most expensive acquisition Microsoft have done so far. And so this is definitely not something you could go ahead without deep consideration. But at the same time, here's the big deadline. They have only left with 40 days or even less to close the deal before potentially TikTok is going to get kicked out. And so I think this is why people may, things may not unfold the way we thought it would be. it might as well, this is why TikTok is also pursuing this parallel conversation in terms of the merger with potentially with Twitter, for instance. Because right now there's just so much uncertainty. And if you're a TikTok senior management team, the only way to cope is to branch out and explore all these options all around you.
Do you think, Howard, that the U.S., Canadian, New Zealand, and Australian operations of TikTok, which Microsoft is considering buying, are worth $30 billion?
I think might be one of the hesitation that Microsoft would harbor. At IMD, when I work with executive, we always think about the high-tech sector that de facto playbook is building one app and roll around the world. And the negotiation right now, what's interesting is it's not even including the UK and Europe in general. So what does it mean? In the future, is Microsoft version of TikTok would not be competing with the Beijing type of version of TikTok in Europe, or they would have exclusive territory going forward? That would be a highly unusual setting for the IT sector. And as a result, people may think about, well, maybe in the end it doesn't justify $50 billion of that amount of money. Because for any board to approve such an amount, we're talking about 10x, or if not at least 7x of payback down the road, given all the political risk one needs to calculate it. So the further you think about this deal, the less attractive it becomes, particularly with all this involvement with the government intervention so explicitly right now.
So if you were a consumer in America, Howard, or in Hong Kong, would you feel comfortable using TikTok?
Sometimes, it's almost like the lack of choices, right? So again, as I described in China, it's almost like you cannot not use WeChat to survive. Everything you do, whether you're calling a taxi like Uber equivalent, you need to use WeChat. All my friends living in China, they're all using WeChat primarily. It's almost like in the United States, if I'm not on Facebook, I cannot connect it with my friends. So I think, by necessity, the lifestyle that we have, not using the two apps seems to be almost impractical. And unfortunately for TikTok, for instance, in Hong Kong, it's no longer available now. So since I arrived in Hong Kong from Switzerland, I noticed that my friends here locally, they could no longer get access to TikTok because the companies simply do not want to get enmeshed into the political fight. And I think the broader story all around this is business can only thrive based on stability, predictability, and transparency. And all this barrage of executive orders really changed the game.
Such good points. Thank you. I'm glad that you could join our show this morning. That's Howard Yu. He's a professor of management and innovation at IMD Business School, joining us live from Hong Kong.